480 BC, the end of September. Here is where the Persian army is watching the Battle of Salamis. Xerxes is sitting back a ways, and their hearts sank when the Persian fleet was destroyed. Now, at this point, Xerxes has a decision to make. What's he going to do? Now, Herodotus says that he went to the Hellespont, the point where he came in, to cross the pontoon bridges they had there before the Athenian fleet sailed around and destroyed it. Now, I believe it was a political decision rather than a strategic decision. Politically, he decided that he came to Greece, he conquered it, and he burned Athens, just what he said he was going to do. So he was going to head back to Ctesiphon and proclaim himself conqueror of Greece and the whole known world and blah, blah, blah. And he left the Persian army here under General Mardonius to wrap up the Peloponnesian area. So it was a political decision that he did this. Now, Xerxes takes off. Now again, the troop amount, again, it's hard to decide what the troops were. If we said that Xerxes invaded Greece with 150 to 200,000 men, they lost 20,000 at Thermopylae, we would say, sitting here watching the battle, the Persians probably had, right, 130 to 150,000 troops. Well, Xerxes, I believe, takes at least 80,000 of them, and he marches back. Now, if he takes 80,000, we're just going to round the number off to 150. If he takes 80,000 of them, he's leaving 70,000 Persians behind. Now, the reason I pick 80,000 is because he leaves 60,000 Persians under the command of Artabazas, and they lay siege to Plataea, which is a city out here on the coast, because what had happened is the navy, which is now under the command of the Spartan general Leotychides. Sorry about the interruption here. The video went blank. It'll be blank for about 1 minute, but the Allied ships, the Greek ships, followed the Persians. The Persians went to Samos Island, and the Greeks went to Delios, and they were eyeing each other right there, ready for battle, but no one wanted to commit to battle yet. The little circle you see up there in the map, that's Plataea. So as Xerxes was retreating, he laid siege to this, because as the Persian army was leaving, some of these cities revolted, and that's what happened here at Plataea. So Xerxes went home, and this is where the two fleets are eyeing each other. Now, the Greeks only have probably about 177 ships there, because the Athenian ships were getting the civilians back off Salamis Island back to Athens because of what Mardonius did. That's what's happening with the ships now as they're doing that. In the meantime, General Mardonius, now he's got some good fortune going on. He's sitting in Athens, and Xerxes left. Now, Xerxes, for all I've been saying about him, how he was an experienced leader, and he was a good organizer, and he took care of what he had to take care of. But he was no soldier. So it was probably better for General Mardonius to start using strategy and tactics like an army would use. So he's sitting in Athens. Well, he is being threatened. He knows that the Peloponnesian army, the Spartans, the Tegians, Argos, the Corinthians, he knows they can come out behind this wall and cut him off. They know the Greek fleet can cut him off from the water. He can get surrounded. So he decides to leave Athens, and he marches out here into the Boeotia area. The Boeotia area is relatively friendly to him. Thebes is their ally. They burned Plataea and Thespia. Phocis is their ally. Behind that is Thessaly. Thessaly's their ally. The Macedonians they own. And Thrace they've conquered, for the last 30 years they've had it. So they go to a safe spot in Boeotia, and he camps there for winter quarters. Remember, the campaign season is coming to an end. They go to winter quarters. The Athenians return back to Athens. They start putting their city back together. And this is the part, remember I showed this last video, this little piece of the wall right here is Themistocles' wall. 479 here, he builds it. He builds the wall. And that's the oldest piece of the Acropolis left right there. So he's building it up. Well, during the winter, this becomes a point of contention between the Greeks, because the Peloponnesian Greeks, who are still behind the wall, remember, even though Mardonius knew they could march out and cut them off, they didn't do that. They stayed there. But now they're blaming the Athenians of building a defensive perimeter and taking care of themselves and not helping the Peloponnesian states. And the Peloponnesian states are going, you know, we're going to stay behind the wall. Now Mardonius is aware of the fragile Greek alliance. So he again sends out peace treaties to the Athenians and tells Themistocles to come to his side. And Themistocles is sending messengers over to Sparta and saying, look, man, if you don't help us, I'm going to surrender to this guy, right? Same thing. And, you know, because there's nothing else I can do. And the Spartan king, you know, who is now Pausanias. Pausanias is in charge of Sparta now because King Leonidas' son was too small to rule, and so Pausanias was put in his stead as regent. And Pausanias is the king's son's cousin and the nephew of King Leonidas. So he's delaying the inevitable right here. He doesn't want to give an answer. So winter's coming to an end. Some decisions are going to have to be made here. Mardonius sends one last peace treaty to Themistocles and asks him to surrender. Themistocles sends one last message to the Spartans and go, dude, if you don't come out here, you know, it's going to be all over. I'm surrendering to him and I'm going to be helping the Persians. And it actually took Chilios from Argos to tell Pausanias, hey man, if we lose the Athenian fleet, we got nothing left here. We're going to be in trouble. So he sends off the Peloponnesian army. So as the messengers come and persuade Pausanias to one last time to come and help, he finds out that the army has already started marching. So they're happy as can be. They go back, they sail back to Themistocles and tells them, man, the army is on the march. Now, Mardonius, sitting out here in Boeotia, he learns that the Peloponnesian army is getting ready to march and gathering to march. So he decides to attack the Athenians. If he can get to Athens and destroy them, at least get them out of the way before he has to fight the Peloponnesian army. So he starts marching. Well, what do the Athenians do? They get out of Athens again and they sail back across to the islands. Nothing the Persians can do about it. So Mardonius comes into Athens for the second time, and this time he burns the city down. So now he still has the same strategic problem, though. The army is marching out past the Corinth isthmus, and they're going to be able to cut the Persians off. And the fleet can cut them off here. So he burns the city, and he goes right back to his Boeotia area. Now, this is a shot. Okay, I'm standing right here. The ruins you see right here is Plataea, ancient Plataea. Sitting down in the fields back there, it's the Aspus River. And behind the river, there's a bend going on right here. So the river goes like this. He fortifies a camp right there, and he sits in the plain. But it's a perfect spot. Mardonius picks the perfect spot. He's not going to get trapped in these little narrow ways that Xerxes has been getting trapped in. And he sits right there. And he has enough wealth and enough booty that he's taken from Greece that he can just buy his supply. He can get a supply line wherever he needs, and he can buy goods. So he doesn't have a problem with that right now. And he's going to wait for the Greeks to come to him, because otherwise he's just going to sit there. So, who shows up to the battlefield? The Athenians are already there. They have about 8,000 men. The Plataeans have about 600. And then the rest of the Boeotian and Attica countries, they have a lot less, 200, 300. So there's about 10,000 Greeks here right now that are watching the Persians across the river. what is General Mardonius left with? General Mardonius is left with hand-picked troops that he was allowed to pick, tell Xerxes what he wanted. So he has the immortals. He has the best troops of the Medes and stuff like that. If we're saying there's about 140,000 troops left, we're saying Xerxes takes 80. We're saying he has about 60,000. Okay? Now, as far as the Persian heavy infantry go, it's about 35 to 40,000 Persian heavy infantry. The rest are light infantry. But he probably has about 60,000 himself, but he has another 20,000 Greek allies from this area, the Thebes, Phocis, all those that are helping him. So that's another 80, and then he does have allies that came with him from Macedonia and Thrace. So we're saying that the Persians have anywhere from 80 to 100,000 troops here. So that's a lot of troops. The Greeks, so there's the Athenians, the Attica area, sitting with about 10,000 hoplites. Well, here comes the Peloponnesian troops. The Persians, the Spartans show up. The Spartans have 10,000. Corinthians have 5,000. The Megaras have another like 3,000. So the Greek hoplites show up now. They have about 35,000 Greek hoplites. So it's an amazing Greek force. In fact, it's the biggest Greek force that's ever been assembled. And they have another 35 or 40 light infantry. So they're sitting with about 90 or 100,000 troops. We're just going to round it out that it's probably 100,000 versus 100,000. So what a battle this would be. So, now, there's a guy by the name of Lazenby who states that Mardonius did not fight aggressively here. Because Herodotus wants to say that Mardonius was aggressively attacking the Greeks, and that's not really the case. I mean, an aggressive maneuver by Mardonius would come to form up for battle, give battle, and fight it, and go after the Greeks. He didn't do that. He was staying behind the river, and he wanted the Greeks to come out after him. Where are the Greeks? Well, here's a shot. These are shots of the hills behind, south of Plataea, because they're back in the hills. That's what the Greeks did. They avoided the Persian cavalry. Because Mardonius, look at his spot now. Mardonius, he picked the plain fields here perfect for his cavalry. He wasn't going to go out and leave that position to attack the Greeks up a ridge and up the mountains. And the Greeks didn't want to come down and attack him in a fortified camp across a river. So they stand there and watch each other for like 3 days. But in the meantime, the Persian cavalry is running out trying to lure the Greeks out of their formation. It's a tactic that a lot of armies use, and it works a lot of times. So as the cavalry is coming out, and they're hitting the right side of the Greek line. Now remember, in ancient battles, who's lined up on the right side? The Spartans, the Tegeans, the Megaras. On this side is the Athenians. Then it's the rest of the Greeks in the middle. So the cavalry is hitting on this side, not quite where the Spartans are. They're hitting on the inside where the Tegeans are, and they get the Tegeans to start breaking formation and chase the cavalry as they keep coming and swooping back. So while this is going on, the light infantry is throwing archers, arrows, stones, whatever, and the cavalry leader of the Persians, Macetius, he is killed, which is a big blow to the Persians. And once that happens, the Persian cavalry leaves, and they go back to their camp. So, at this point, Pausanias decides, now remember, all the Greeks had their own generals. In charge of the Athenians was Aristides. And they all decide, they have to get together and decide, hey, we don't want to sit here in the mountains anymore, because the supplies that they're getting has to travel through these mountains all the way back to Attica, and it is a long distance, and the Persian cavalry can come out and cause problems if they go around this. So they decide to move down north of Plataea, right across the river from the Persians, because now here's some springs, okay? Again, this is freshwater wells, but these aren't the real ones. I'm just trying to show you. I'm here at Plataea, and these wells are sitting here in the ground. They had a well that was right to the east side of Plataea, the ancient city, and they can get their fresh water from there and have their supply lines go a little bit farther, but their fresh water would be close. So they set up north of Plataea. And this hill right here, okay, the river running across there is the Asopus River. This is Asopus Hill. And this is the left flank of the Athenians. I mean, of the Greeks. This is where the Athenians are standing. And then it shoots out this way. Now, it does not go as far as the bend in the river where the Persians are. It comes right in front of Plataea, stops about here. The fresh water's like here. So, again, this is 4 or 5 days into this, and Mardonius still is only skirmishing. He's not assaulting. He's not giving battle. He's trying to stay in his defensive position. It's a good move. It's a sound strategy. Pausanias, he's forcing the issue. But what does the Persians do? They start sending out the cavalry again, and they start going for more skirmishes. And that's all that happens here for a couple more days. But the cavalry now starts going around the entire Greek line, and they captured a wagon supply that was heading to the Greeks. So the Greeks realize they can't hold this too well, and the Persians poison the water. So the Pausanias is like, yeah, this ain't good. He isn't coming out to fight. He's just going to skirmish us and maneuver and harass us. We got to go back. So he doesn't want to back up in the middle of the day, because remember, an army that is always backing up and out of formation gets massacred. And in ancient battles, that's always what it came down to. I mean, very rarely do two armies engage, come together in hand-to-hand combat and stand there and fight until the last guy died. I mean, that was what remark about the Spartans. Usually when you were losing a few men and you decided you lost, you would turn around and run, and then that's when the real slaughter would take place. So Pausanias knows this, so they wait till nighttime. So at night, he orders the Greeks to return back to the south side of Plataea. And the Athenians and the Spartans, the more experienced troops, would cover that move. So at night they move. Well, guess what? They get lost. They're confused. They didn't make it to the right spot. And, you know, they're just the Greeks. They're not the professional soldier types. And so when dawn breaks, Mardonius notices, he thinks the Greeks are retreating. He thinks they're retreating. But even if you don't think they're retreating, he can tell that only half of the Greek line moved. The Athenians didn't move at the right time. They chose to sit there in the daytime. They didn't want to move because they were supposed to follow after, and so were the Spartans. And Aristides was like, no, I can't go now. You know, the Persians notice what's happening here. And Pausanias, the commander of the Spartans, his general says, no, we're not backing up because we don't retreat. So they end up staying there while the rest of the Greeks are fuddling around behind Plataea. And Mardonius noticed the confusion going on, and he decides to take the immortals and attack. So now he decides to attack. It's like the 9th day into the battle. And he comes out and he rushes the Spartan side, the right side with the immortals. And as he's rushing the side, the cavalry come out first. The cavalry come and they attack the Greeks. The Greeks hold the formation. They retreat. Remember, the immortals are marching up. Then they throw in a volley of arrows. The Greeks hunker down under a volley of arrows with their shields. I mean, the Greeks are getting hammered. The Spartans are getting hammered. And it looks like they're in trouble. And Pausanias calls for Aristides, the Athenians, to come and help. And they don't. Because approaching them are the Thebians, you know, Phocas, and some other Persians are now advancing on the Athenians. So he's got his own problems. Now the problem here that happens, the turn of the battle, is the rest of the Persian army that's in the camp. There's a rear guard that is in the camp. But most of the army sees the immortals moving out with Mardonius, so they start to follow. So almost the entire Persian army is coming out to give battle. So the battle is taking place now, and I don't think that's what Mardonius wanted. Mardonius just wanted the immortals to come out and with the cavalry and the archers and see if they can break the Greeks. But the whole army follows. Once the whole army follows, the Spartans engage. The Athenians are engaged. The rest of the Greeks got their act together, formed up, and they come down and start helping the Spartans. So the Spartans and the rest of the Greeks take on the immortals here, the cavalry, and they start going to town. Remember, even though it's the Persian heavy infantry, the hoplites are heavier. Their armor, their fighting techniques better, and they're going to win out. And they start kicking the Persians' butt. The Athenians are holding their ground here against the Thebans, but they also defeat the Thebans. So now the army has to start running. It doesn't have to. It starts running when you're getting beat. Well, as they start running and getting back into camp, the Spartans are still pushing against the immortals. The immortals are holding back the withdrawal as fast as they can, but the rest of the Greeks go into the camp. They're not even ordered to do so, but they see the camp open and they rush inside and they start destroying the Persian camp. Well, the rear guard, he sees that his camp is getting run over. He doesn't stay and fight. He takes the rest of the men, which is probably about 35,000 men, and he leaves. He starts retreating. So the rest of the Persian army here, right, out of we're saying 100,000, so we're saying about 60,000, right, 70,000, it's somewhere in there, stay here on the field and get slaughtered. The Persians lost anywhere from 40 to 60,000 men in this battle. Crazy, because they all started running. And now the Greek numbers are different, but some say it could be as much as 10,000 Greeks were killed. Most people believe it was less than that. So another great victory. The only time the Greek army has defeated a Persian army on an open field of battle. And up to this time. After that, of course, the Greeks start invading after. So as they're all running, the Greeks start following up, and they're not letting them get out. Remember, the Greeks are good at the pursuit. Okay, now while Plataea was happening, remember, there was a couple things. First, the spot up there where the circle and the X is at Plataea, that was a 3-month siege. Remember, they started sieging that on their way out, and they failed on that. In fact, Herodotus records a catastrophe that happened, and we do know that a tsunami happened up there, and we think it destroyed the Persians, many of them. Anyways, the sea battle at Mycale, remember the ships had sailed out and they went to Samos, the Persian ships, and they decided to beach their ships and fortify themselves on the land. Leotychides wasn't sure of what to do at that point, but they decided to land upshore and fight them on land after they first destroyed all the Persian ships, and then they defeated them there. So this was the end of the Persian invasions of Greece. After this, it would be the Greeks and led by the Athenians trying to control all the Aegean Sea area here. And how did the Greeks, being so divided, rally themselves to take on the enemy? It's amazing. That's what nations have to do. And we can say, Herodotus does say, it's the Athenians that rally the patriotism of the Greeks. But I'm going to take it a step further, and I'm going to say, patriotism only goes so far. I mean, you can blame the Thessalians area, the Boeotian area, the Macedonians for surrendering to the Persians, but remember, the Persians are marching on them with a huge army, and there's no other Greeks there to help them. All the other Greeks are running to their defended spots, especially the Peloponnesians. Remember, they wanted to stay behind the Corinth Isthmus, a wall, and defend themselves. What would they have done if the Persians came that way? So you can't really blame these countries for surrendering. So patriotism, I don't know. What I would say is liberty. Liberty, and all resistance fighters, revolutions, I think, is the true motivation. the one they the one's own notion of their own liberty and not to be enslaved by someone else. I think that was the true motive. Now, we know homosexuality was prevalent through the Greek world. Uh, the Greeks, especially like the Spartans in their agoge system, as new recruits would come in, they're 7 years old, and you had 30-year-olds up till the time all living in amongst themselves in the same barracks and stuff and training. Even at 30 you were allowed to go get married because you had to procreate. That's what the Spartans needed to do. But you came back to the system and you lived in the system. So there was a lot of old men, 40, 50-year-old men that did have young boys that they took under their wing and had sexual relations with them. It was normal to them. The Romans, even when they came over and conquered the Greeks, they used to call the Greek, they used to say things like, oh, the Greek custom. They called it, when you talked about their homosexuality and how they really liked younger boys, older men liked the younger boys, they used to say, oh, the Greek custom. So people knew, and it was prevalent through it. Now, was it as widespread as modern historians like to say today? I don't think so. But it was definitely there. And I definitely think the Spartans had lovers among themselves in their ranks. And what better reason to fight for than your lover standing beside you? So it was definitely there. Now, but probably not as much as we think about, or we would like to think about. However, I do want to say, the Thebans, they were an all homosexual elite force. It was actually a test that they wanted to try, and I'm just showing this right here. This is a Theban monument because they called the elite force of the Thebans the Sacred Band. And in the Sacred Band, you lived together and you trained together like we talked about the Spartans do. That's what they did. However, you also had to be engaged and have sexual relations. You had to have a boyfriend to be in that elite force. You couldn't go in single. So every single person in there was 150 couples, right? There was 300 to this Sacred Band. 150 couples, and they were all lovers. And the test was, they felt that if you were fighting among people that you loved and for your family, that you would fight hard and die for. So the Sacred Band was an all homosexual elite force. And they were elite, but I just wanted to show, this is we're at Chaeronea in Greece, and this is a monument dedicated to the Sacred Band, because guess what? Alexander the Great, when he was marching through Greece, 35,000 Theban and Athenians and other Greeks tried to stand against the Macedonians and Alexander, and he defeated them, and he wiped out the entire Sacred Band in one afternoon. And this monument is the burial spot, and the head points to where the battle took place. And I thought that was something interesting, because the Thebans didn't believe in retreating either, and so they were all wiped out right there. So that's it for the Greeks. Gotta love them. They stood up to a bigger force.